Hey there. Before we get started, I just wanted to come on and ask you all a favor. In our research, we've discovered that the vast majority of you do not actually like and subscribe to our podcast. And so, if I could ask you to do so, I won't ask you for anything else. And I promise to make this podcast the best I can every day. Me and the team really strive to do that for you. And so, if you could do this for us, we would be eternally grateful. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Mikkel Weber, founder and auteur of House of Peregrine. Expat, immigrant, pioneer, none of these were a fit, but Peregrine describes what we are all about perfectly. Those that craft their life story with intention. I've spent the last 6 years in awe of the life-changing connections and stories I have experienced while living abroad, and believe it is time for this adventure to be recognized, celebrated, and elevated to the life stage that it is. Through these interviews, I hope to connect those living internationally more deeply to both the place they are living and with themselves and those around them. We cover everything from international finances and meaning-making to global parenting and relationships to make your time abroad more intentional, edifying, and full of beauty. Find us at houseofperegrine.com, where you can find more ways to connect with the ethos of Peregrine. I hope you enjoy today's guest. Let's get started. Okay, today we have Alex Ingrim, who has agreed to meet with me to talk about how to make your finances match your Instagram photos, how to plan well and intentionally for an international move. Thank you so much for joining us, Alex. I want you to just give us a quick introduction, and then I'll give you a quick introduction. So what I have for you is Alex has an expertise in financial planning for individuals living abroad. He says that he has an expertise in Americans living abroad because of the double tax situation that is unique to U.S. citizens, but also individuals from other passport countries. His unique ability seems to be having a network of experts, as well as a point of view that lends his expertise to the worldview of people who wish to live more internationally. He sees living abroad as a life event and has helped many people strategize and move abroad so it goes smoothly financially. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great summary of who I am and how I work.
That's great. Well, I wanted to bring you on because I really think that people don't always know where to turn when they're thinking of making this change. And, through growing up in the US, at least, the country's big. You think the whole world operates that way financially. So you plan your life that way. So I would love to hear when someone comes to you and says, I want to make a move abroad. How do you think about this?
Yeah, so I think the first step and the first question we ask them is actually where. So where are you looking at moving to? And then why? Because I think understanding their motivation for moving abroad is important. So there are some situations we come across where, someone's like, I want to move to Spain, for example, and I want to move to Spain for a couple of years just to experience it and be a digital nomad. And we would talk about kind of different issues with that person than we would someone who says, my husband's Italian and we're going to retire in Italy and we're going to spend the rest of our lives there. So it's important to us to understand why you're moving, what you're looking to do, and kind of what you're looking to get out of the move too, because there are different things that we can help people with based on what their goals are. So I always say that there's some financial planning that goes into it, but the life structuring aspect comes even before financial planning. So we have to understand a little bit about you and about who you are before we really start to work with you. And then once we have the where and the why, we can start gathering info about your finances and guiding you on what we think the next best steps are.
Yeah, that's great. So it's more of you see the financial planning part is more of an enabling force to a larger life plan, basically.
Absolutely. I mean, really the way that we look at money is money is there to enable kind of freedom. And then freedom should hopefully enable happiness, right? Because my personal life perspective is that it's all about being happy. It's about being able to make the choices that you want to make and live the life that you want to live. And money is just a means to an end. It isn't the end. There's plenty of good quotes out there that, like kind of, if all that you focus on money, if all that you focus on is money, money is all you're going to have at the end of the day, right? It's more about the people around you and the experiences you have. So we just want to enable people to have those experiences. If they want to go on huge, $25,000 a go trips, 3 times a year, we want to be able to enable that, if that's within their means. So it's all about kind of this kind of enabling experiences and lifestyle, rather than trying to make someone rich or help them become even wealthier. That's typically not what our clients are looking for. They're looking for, how do I have this lifestyle that I want?
Yeah. And the two questions that come up for me are, I think we say lifestyle you want, but where do you think that comes from? That knowing of, maybe it's not the most lavish lifestyle, maybe it is, but it is intentional. It is something that you're creating, that may be different from how you were raised. What's your experience of that? Like, why do you think you understand that so deeply?
I think there are a few different kind of life experiences that lead people down this path. So for me and my wife, we each had completely different experiences that led us to the same place. So my wife's experience is probably really close to a lot of the clients that we talk to, where my wife grew up in Australia, but her father was from Northern Italy and her mother was from London. And Australia was just never really a comfortable place for her because she was raised in a European household with 2 different cultures influencing her. Her dad was very Italian and her mother was an East Londoner. So those are 2 very strong kind of cultures. And so she left Australia as soon as she could because it was never comfortable. It was never natural. And we have a lot of clients that, they're Irish or they're English or they're, from continental Europe, and they're looking to move back. They've worked in the US, but it doesn't feel like home. So they just are trying to come home and kind of be closer to family. And I can certainly understand that. And then from my perspective, I think it's just kind of, I think there's a few aspects of it that for me are appealing about living internationally. I think the first is just experiencing something new, kind of broadening your horizons. I always had an innate curiosity and hunger to talk to people and experience something new. And then as soon as I got immersed in another culture, the first other country I lived in was France. And that feeds a sort of intellectual addiction to experiencing new things and finding out about new cultures and doing something different. But also, once my eyes were open to a different way of thinking about the world, the French and American worldviews are different and similar in many ways. And I saw that the French and the Americans really aren't that different at the end of the day. I'd lived in a French household and an American one. And these experiences bring us closer together as people and help us understand each other. And then you want to go and find that somewhere else, right? Whether it's Italy, whether it's India, whether it's, somewhere further afield. So I think that had always appealed to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so we should say, I guess, that you're American and living in Italy.
Yeah.
And I'd like to speak a little bit. I would like to speak very briefly, but hit on, because you're an expert at this, about the unique tax treatment or treatment in general of citizenship for Americans living abroad.
Yeah, so the US is one of only 2 countries in the world where you have a tax liability to the country based on your citizenship, based on your nationality, instead of where you actually physically reside. So what that means is that when you're American and you move to another country, you still are liable to file a tax return to the IRS. So you still have to play by the US rules. And then you also have the additional complication of playing by the rules of your new country. So, if you move, for example, to Italy and you're American, you have to play by 2 different sets of rules. Those rules don't always see eye to eye. And then there are additional complications depending on your asset base for how each country treats those. And there are double taxation agreements and lots of great tools that you can use. But again, the double taxation agreement isn't created for you and I, the citizen. It's created to say which country gets to tax what. And so there's not always a great overlap there. So we try and guide people through that, because I personally have lived abroad for 15 years in pretty much my entire adult life. And so I've been dealing with this dual liability for my entire career and struggled to find anyone that could guide me or just have a conversation with me about what it meant for my life.
Did you know that House of Peregrine has an app? It is full of resources, information, and products to make life as an international more connected and more intentional. As a member of House of Peregrine, you also now have access to exclusive discounts, products, guides, and events to make life more fun and connected. Simply download the app at houseofperegrine.com and save it to your home screen. Okay, back to the show.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I think, I know a lot of people, obviously I'm American, so this has kind of also been my struggle. But I think what is interesting there is that, we're navigating it alone in a way, right? So that's really one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on, actually, is because I think bringing us all together and collaborating and being, sharing this information and also resources can actually make your life a lot more beautiful in relaxing. And so there's the people that plan a long time, right? They just want to do it because of their life.
Yeah.
Because it's one of their life goals. There's also people who move because of a job. And maybe they don't have as long to plan. Maybe they have 6 months. Do you also work with those people?
Yeah, definitely. And we actually work with those people in both ways. It's people that are, coming to the countries we work in Europe that for work reasons, or we're seeing a lot of people getting in touch because they're moving to the US for work reasons and struggling to understand what that means. And what we've been seeing is that, companies will support people, and there's lots of great support that the companies provide. But where they stop providing the support is kind of on your personal asset base. So like, okay, I'm thinking of selling my house after I move. What does that mean? I have all of these different investments. What does that mean when I move abroad? So that's kind of where we step in and try and be the last piece of the puzzle there.
Yeah. And what is, I think I know the answer to this, but like, what are give us one or two scenarios of things you've seen where people weren't aware and then they got kind of in a sticky situation?
Yeah, I think from an American standpoint, one of the really big things is that Roth IRAs are not recognized in a lot of the countries that we work in. For a country to recognize a Roth IRA is actually an exceptional circumstance. For the most part, a country like Italy, a country like Spain, Portugal, they don't recognize Roth IRAs. So that's the first thing that people kind of go, oh, okay, that it stands out to them. And then I think, one of
and what does that mean to not recognize it? If you could be more specific.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you invest in a Roth, when you're American, it's after-tax money that you're putting into your Roth account so that it can grow capital gains tax-free. But also when you take money out, the distribution is tax-free. So what it means in the context of, and every country is a little different with this, but what it means in a, Italian context, for example, is that Italy is actually going to tax that account like it's an investment account, not like it has a special tax treatment. So it does not grow tax-free. You will be liable to Italian capital gains tax, although you won't be liable to any U.S. taxes. So it actually just kind of, it defeats the purpose of some of the planning to a certain extent.
Right. You're planning for two different eventualities in this way. You're planning for two different systems. Okay, cool. That covers it. I think that gives us a good idea. And people do Roth IRAs, and this is going to sound funny to people who don't. grow up in the system, but Americans are mostly without a safety net. So we're all planning for our own safety net. And so this may, I find myself explaining this a lot to my European friends. Like, there's no real, like, you're building your own retirement plan in the US. And here, that's foreign to some of our European friends, that there's no real safety net. And so I think that's a difference, but also it matters to you when you're going through it. Cool. So thanks for the technical answer. So the other question that came to mind while you were speaking was, what if people don't have, what if they don't have a plan? What if they just want to go abroad for a year and try it out? Do you work with those type of people, and what kind of advice do you give them?
I think so we're always happy to sit down and talk to people. We always have free initial consultations with people, and there's no kind of barrier to getting in touch and starting a discussion. So we frequently talk with people that are saying, hey, I'm just looking to do this for a year or two. I don't know what it means. Can you tell me what it means? And we'll guide them down that path depending on where they might want to live. And the question that we get quite often in that situation is, when am I tax resident? So I want to go move to Spain for a year and work on the beach. When do I become tax resident? And that's kind of where we guide them. And then, the next step in that conversation is, what are the consequences of me becoming tax resident? When do I need to think about filing? And so that's when we can give you some really practical guidance, right? And just have that kind of initial conversation, because we've probably all been in the situation, I definitely have, where, it starts out as a 1-year plan, and then it turns into a 5-year plan. Then it turns into a 10-year plan. You might have kids. You might get comfortable. I ended up in Europe just by happenstance. I was 19 and I met my wife, and my wife was 27. So she was much older. And I tried to take her back to the US. We tried to start a life in the US, and she couldn't live there. So that's why we ended up back in Europe, is just because of the easier immigration process. And so that was never in the broad plan, let's say. It was more just to experience Europe. And then all of a sudden it becomes your life. So we try and guide people with that in mind, that it's not, okay, it can start out as a 1-year plan and you can hate it, or it could start out as a 1-year plan and you can love it. And we try and give people a lot of practical guidance. And my wife and I have this conversation constantly, that it takes 2 years to know if you really like a place. The first year is really, really exciting and everything's new. And then the second year you get into a rhythm. And by the end of year 2, you can kind of look back and say, oh, okay, we really like it here, or it's just too difficult in daily life to be a foreigner in this place. So that's we always tell our friends, just stay patient, in that first 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's unusual to plan your life that way, right? And I think if you're living in the same country you grew up in, or you haven't been as intentional, or you're happy where you grew up, or you haven't been as intentional with how you spend your time, you don't have these conversations, financially or otherwise. And so I think it's exceptional in the world to be having this conversation. And that you're enabling that, basically. You're enabling that. And so do you see yourself, so when someone comes to you, they say, Alex, I want to try a country. For whatever reason, 1 year, 10 years, I'm retiring there.
Yeah.
What are the next steps you tell them? I mean, do you tell them to come to you? Actually, you and I have done this, and we had an initial call, and you said, I need to know more about what your life plan is and what your goals are. And so that seems to be a really important process, that's led by the person that you're working with.
Yeah, it is. And it's because this is, when we work with people, it's a relationship, and we're looking for long-term relationships, right? So when we really, enter into a formal relationship. So we really need to understand what people's motivations are. And we don't need to know, like, hey, this is a definite plan, this is what's going to happen. But we need to understand, that something else might be in the cards. If someone says, hey, I'm I'm living in Spain and then all of a sudden they're going to move to Canada, for example, that changes the picture a lot. So we need to, have a little bit of advanced warning. That always helps us plan. But we never like to pigeonhole people into, okay, you need this because you're going to be in this country for the rest of your life too. So we really preach simplification, flexibility, keeping all of your options open, because we know once you've lived in one country, it's very likely that you're going to live somewhere else. And we see it just based on our clients, right? Like I said, some of them are European, US dual nationals that come back to Europe, but a lot of them are US Department of Defense, ex US military, because those people have lived abroad and they're really comfortable with that idea. And so they, after it's all said and done in their careers, they think, hey, I really liked living in that one country. I'd really like to go back there and spend more time. And I think that's a really interesting thing from my perspective to see.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, we often say, that's why House of Peregrine is called what it is, right? Like it's a mentality. Being peregrine means that you see the world differently. And I think that's, it's really beautiful, but the world is not made for that, which seems to be where
Exactly.
you come into their team.
Yeah.
And so if I can ask, so what then is the mode? I think you can work with people in a couple of different ways. But before we go into that, I would love to chat with you about what you see as what's the commonality in your clients? Like, what is it that brings what's the red thread through your clientele, do you think?
I think that there's a few things. From a very American perspective, there's an acknowledgement, and it's not just American. I think it's British. I think it's an Anglophone thing. Is that the commonality is that there's an acknowledgement that while our countries are great to work in, and it's quite easy to develop wealth if you're educated and have certain connections in our countries, the quality of life is lacking in many ways, and the experiences that you can have are lacking in a lot of ways. And a great example of that is if you travel around a place like Spain or a place like Italy, and you see all the different regional cuisines that exists in a lot of the Anglophone countries, but it's not as magnified, right? So there's different, it's just more interesting in some respects to be in some of these European countries, but also just the quality of care and the cultural acknowledgement that, what it is to be human and the dignity that people operate with is a little bit different than in Anglophone cultures. And I think that's really attractive to people. You want to live in a place where people look after each other. You want to live in a place where there's an acknowledgement that, we need healthcare at a basic level. We need education at a basic level. And that there should be a floor on all of these things, and the places that I've lived, Florence in Italy, where I live now, is one of them. You see very little homelessness. You see very little destitution and things like that. And it just becomes more normal. And that's kind of a perspective that you realize. And that's the feedback that we've gotten from a lot of our clients, is that they're seeking a higher quality of life. They're seeking to be able to kind of live their life without a lot of extraneous noise, right? Without a lot of interruption or distraction, and spend time with their partner and their children and really live the important things in life.
So it seems like it's a matter of prioritization, but also this awareness of how, so I always say my time is my investment as well. Like where I spend my time,
Yeah.
it's how I want to spend my heartbeats, right? Like that's how I like to look at it. And that's actually a really privileged way to look at it, but it's mine. And so I try my best to do that. And I think the people I've met, it doesn't work for them in these cultures. Sometimes it's just not
how they want to spend their moments on this planet, right? And so that, I think it can be seen very much as a privileged thing to do, and it is. But also, we wish it for everyone, right? So in
Yeah.
a way, we're the ambassadors for that notion that things are not working in a country or aren't, it's like the canary in the coal mine. I like to think of it.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is, definitely had a lot of feedback from people when you see comments online or things in social media that moving abroad is for a certain section of American or British society or whatever it may be, right? It's for the privileged few. And I think what's happened is that there, yes, okay, that's kind of the headline, but there is a subsection of society where really we use this word expat a lot, but a lot of people really are immigrants that are coming from the US, that are coming from the UK, that have moved at a very young age, that are not particularly wealthy at all, that have spent most of their careers in Europe, and they still need the same level of basic care and help as the fantastically wealthy American that's buying a villa in Portugal and moving there to spend their retirement. So we try and acknowledge that there's this spectrum of people that need help, not just the wealthy few who we can work with. So, that's why we always do the free consultations, is that the issues are the same, whether you have a lot of wealth or a little bit of wealth, and whether you're retired or trying to grow your wealth. The challenges are just as high. So we're trying to at least give out a lot of free information and act as a resource for people that are maybe just in the first steps, but still feel like they're facing all of those challenges. And I've probably done an equal amount of consultations this year with people that are, you wouldn't consider wealthy and they're trying to grow their wealth, and people that you would consider wealthy and they're just looking to protect their wealth. So I think it's important to acknowledge that there's a wide spectrum of people that are moving and people that live abroad.
Yeah. Yeah. Immigrant, expat, we need a new word. And that's why we call ourselves Peregrine, right? Because it's not always representative. Okay. So I want to switch gears a little bit. I love everything you've said there. So now I want to move back to your process because I think it's really interesting. So basically you become, in a way, a part of the team, part of creating your, the life story you want, basically.
Yeah.
And you're the financial experts, or you call in people. So tell me a little bit about the hub that you imagine for your clients. You're the hub, and then there's a network around you of people that are experts.
Definitely. So what we like to think of ourselves as are financial planners. And a lot of that is about being a financial project manager. So essentially what we're doing is we're building a visualization of your financial life. We're building something that we can all look at together and sit down on paper and see. And so that's going to include your income, your asset base, things like social security or state pensions in different countries. And we're looking at how all of that is mapped out, right? And then we're looking at different opportunities for financial planning. So in some countries, you can take advantage of certain tax schemes. We're looking at areas where it's important that we don't make mistakes, because that's just as important as maximizing your opportunities. And then we're looking at how we can meet your goals, while at the same time ensuring that you've got enough kind of money to live and do what you need to do. So we act as kind of a fulcrum on which some of this stuff turns. And really what some people need is they need a tax advisor. So we call in a tax advisor that's a specialist for your situation. So whether it's US, Italy, whether it's, a Brit in Portugal, we can handle, those different types of conversations and guide you on the best tax advisor to use. There's also an issue with tax filing. And I think a lot of people, once they get the tax advice, okay, deep breath, and we can move on. Well, really, the logistical part of the tax filing is just as hard. And we don't do the filing, but we work with accountants to make sure that, okay, we've got this strategy as an overlay. Is the filing going to actually follow as a part of that? Because if you get certain aspects of the filing wrong, or the filing doesn't, follow the strategy, all of our good work is undone. And then there's other people that need to come in, like estate planning attorneys. Some people really, they need a banker. They need to be able to open a bank account in the country they live in. They don't speak the language. And it's, oh my gosh, how do I do that? And so we try, and even in some of the countries we work in, we have an English speaking banker. We can tell you the best, bank to go to for being foreign in the country. So we can act as this center within your financial life. And depending on how deep people want the relationship to run, we can manage and look after a lot of those relationships that kind of feed off of the hub that we build.
Yeah. And that is fantastic. You and I spoke earlier briefly about the different ways money is seen in different countries and taxes. Yeah. And I'd love for you to expound on that for our listeners, because I think it's so true. These nuances they're part of culture, right? So the way different countries treat it, and it's a paradigm. And so I'd like you to speak to that just a tiny bit.
Yeah, and it's also embedded in the tax code, which I find really interesting, right? Is because the way that a culture looks at money is embedded into the tax code. So one really good example, and I'm quoting a tax advisor we work with in Spain on this, is that when you go and you file your US tax return, there's all these different things that you can do, different strategies, different, let's say, loopholes that you can take advantage of. And I don't file taxes, but I've been told when you go and file taxes in Spain, there's only one way to do it. You can go to 4 different accountants, and they're all going to fill in the form the same way, because it's prescribed. There is no necessarily way to take advantage of different things unless you're enrolled in a certain program. So, that's just one way that we look at money. Like Americans and Anglophone cultures look at money as an opportunity, right? Taxes are an opportunity to save yourself money. Whereas in other countries, taxes are an obligation. They're something where you're taking part in the collective obligation, right? To pay your kind of debt to society in a way. And then, across Northern and Southern Europe, there's a completely different spectrum too, right? Where some people in Southern Europe view things as, over the top, the tax code isn't fair, and there's, a big black market economy that exists beneath kind of what we would look at as the normal economy. And that's obviously not good for a country's health, financial health. And then just in investing, there are just hugely divergent views on, what's a good investment? What kind of attitude to risk would I want to take? So if you think about the idea that we in the US invest our own pensions, or our company invests our own pensions. So we have 401ks that we can contribute to. We can invest in those as we see fit, right? You can roll them over into an IRA. You can self-manage everything. Those types of structures don't exist in every country in the world. And not every, nationality or culture is happy or comfortable with investing in the stock market. It gives our US companies a ton of capital with which to, invest further in the economy, hire and grow. But at the same point in time, it leaves the individual person that's investing their IRA themselves susceptible to making poor decisions, right? And so that kind of structure does exist in other Anglophone cultures, but you don't see it as much in continental Europe, if at all. And what you do is you build up sometimes a state pension allowance, sometimes you can invest in other products, but it's just not as stock market heavy. And then, the other part is the US has probably the cheapest, most developed financial system in the world as far as investing and getting in experts, and it's transparent. Whereas in Europe, things aren't as transparent. there are much higher fees, much higher commissions on different products. So, we even in my industry look at the US as we're trying to guide you. Whereas in Europe, it's more of a we're trying to sell to you. So
Mm.
there's just at every step you can see that there's just a cultural divergence.
Yep. And that can lead, if you don't maybe recognize that, it can lead to being out of your depth very quickly, I think. And so, yeah, for the example for me is we came here on an 8-year visa. Um, it's the 30% ruling. It's a very nice scheme that the Dutch government does. And they just shortened it right when I was here 5 years to 5 years. So we had to scramble. We had an agreement with the government, but politics should have told us that maybe it would change, right? If we were reading the newspapers,
Yeah.
but it was a blind spot for us because we didn't know the history of this scheme. So we're in the US and the Dutch government tells us, this is great, please come, this is our agreement. And so you can get in a lot of, not trouble, but it really can disrupt your plans very quickly if you don't
Yeah.
understand the nuances of the culture, I think. And that's something that I didn't expect. And I know many of my friends didn't expect, right? Money's money, investing is investing. And it's silly to think back that I was that naive, but indeed I was. And so I think that's part of why I wanted to bring you on, is because a lot of people suffer, or at least are confused about this and think it's just because they don't, it's them, right? And what it is these systems are not made for people that are going between them always. And that's how I see it.
No, they're not at all. I mean, globalization happened, right? And the ease of traveling between countries happened, and tax codes are, one of the last things to adjust. And we're starting to see it, but what we're seeing is a competition, right? So what we're seeing is a competition between various different countries across the world to attract digital nomads and retirees. And they're offering all of these great tax incentives to come to their countries and essentially live there and spend money. They're not always looking for a great investment, like you have to buy a house or you have to invest in the economy. Sometimes it's just come live here and spend money. We need more people, in some countries.
Yep.
So I think that's part of it. And then, yeah, I mean, I think you know, we can't, one of the big things is you shouldn't beat yourself up about certain things that occur in your financial life, right? So if you move to a new country and you don't see a change in rules coming or a change in government coming, that's not necessarily on you. It's just a part of the process of learning about a different culture, right? So
Yep.
one thing that we highlight to people is that countries like Spain, countries like Italy are quite inconsistent in how they treat some of these things. Spain probably above all others
Yeah.
that we specialize in, right? Because they're trying to adjust wealth taxes right now, and it seems like the different regions and the federal government do this all the time. But you would not know that if you were sitting on the other side of the world and you weren't paying
Yeah.
attention to very specific things or knew all these different terms to Google, right? So I
Mhm.
think it's about, a lot of this is about giving yourself a break and allowing yourself to be wrong and then learn from that. Because I've spent 15 years learning from mistakes. And I think that's where I can help people that are fairly new to this, is that, learn from some of our mistakes. Let us save you 5 hours Googling. And we can really provide that in a 1 hour conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I know the Roth IRA one. What's the number one mistake you see people make, if you can point to one?
Not knowing their tax obligation in their new country. So I think that there's a few different layers of that. But one is just thinking that when you move abroad, if you're not moving for financial reasons, right, like lower cost of living or lower taxes, that you think that you can just keep paying your taxes in the US or the UK, or wherever you come from, because all your assets are there. So not acknowledging that you've become tax resident of a new country and they want to tax your worldwide assets typically. So it's actually interesting from that perspective, because we see that pretty often.
Yeah. And it seems like between the US and Europe, if you're a European tax resident, they want to tax your worldwide assets. The US wants to do the same, but it doesn't matter where you're located, which I think is very interesting. And it clashes quite often.
It clashes quite often, and even on really specific things. So, and the Roth IRA is the most glaringly obvious example of that. But it's important when you know, sit down with us, or you're starting to research different countries, and if your asset base is like highly concentrated in one type of structure, or all of your income is going to come from something like Social Security, just take a look at how that new country is going to tax Social Security. Take a look at if you think you'll be comfortable. And you're not going to know if you're going to be comfortable until you've lived there for a year, right? You're never going to know that. You're not going to know that in, Portugal, eating out for two people costs, far less than it does in even, a mid-sized town in the US. So that's something you only gain through experience.
Yep. With the rest of our time, I love that we're at the beginning of the process, but I want to talk about those people that are trying to actually make a life, these outside of their country. Just for the rest of our time, I kind of want to talk about that a little bit. Sometimes we're at retirement, sometimes we're young doing this, but sometimes we're married with kids or with kids. And there's many variations of that. 2 countries with kids. There's so much richness in this midlife part, but there's also a lot of tax obligation and otherwise. And so I'd like you to speak about that a little bit, and how you think about it and how you guide people through that phase of their life if they're doing that internationally.
Yeah. So I think the first thing that we try to acknowledge with people that are, in the middle of their life, working with children, with a lot of stuff going on, and they're going to be in their country for the foreseeable future, is just checking in on their mentality, right? How do you feel about being there? Are you, happy with your level of income, with your tax obligation, with all of these different things? Because when you're working in these countries, quite often the tax code's a little bit different than what you grew up with and what your baseline expectations are. And, we just need to check in with people and say, okay, you might be paying 45% of your income in taxes, but what's the rest of your life look like? Because often when people come and speak to us, it's because there's a lot of unknowns in their life, or they might be frustrated about their situation. So when they're frustrated about their situation or worried, and that's typically the midlife conversation we have with people, we slow everything down and we just start from the basics and say, look, you have a high tax obligation. What's your cost of living? Are you doing okay? How can we help you adjust kind of the cash flow needs that you have, and look 20 years out to say, okay, am I going to have enough for retirement? If I'm not, what does that look like? How can we change that? Is there a way to change that? And often what comes out of the conversations midlife, the initial conversation anyway, is number one, things aren't as bad as people perceive them to be, right? Even if you have a 45% tax rate, things aren't as bad as people perceive them to be, because mentally what happens is we're siloing different parts of our life, right? It's everything is so bad in this moment, how do I change that? And we have to say, yeah, but look out 5 years from now. Your kids might be grown up. You're going to have less expenses. You're going to have more opportunities to do different things. And what we encourage people to do, this goes back to the very first part of our conversation, is if you're not happy or you're feeling very, overwhelmed with your financial life right now, what kind of adjustments can we make? Where can we guide you to get happier in the moment? Because what happens when we feel overwhelmed, and what happens when we feel desperate, is we compound bad choices. We keep making bad choices, right? So if we can get someone through a series of conversations to a place where they're comfortable, where they're at, and we know that things aren't dire and desperate, and we can get them to that place where they understand that, we start making really good choices on the path forward. And I think that's something that we call behavioral coaching, kind of in the finance field. And it's probably one of the most important things we do for people that are kind of in that 30 to 55 age range, is just say, calm down. It might not be that bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I don't know if you would agree with this, but I think that we're, as people living between countries or in two different tax, I don't like to use the word tax because there's so much more to it. It's like you're living in two cultures,
Yeah.
but you're planning for two different eventualities. I think there's more opportunity for existential crises. Like, I just really think that 2-year cycle of and so I think, do you think that's a bigger part of your job maybe than other financial planners, say
Yeah.
that are just dealing with people? It's a larger part of your job, and what you're offering is that really getting real with yourself and what your situation is on a more regular basis.
Well, so I think what's really interesting, and this probably it would be really interesting to you and your audience, is that what we see very often is that it's not the people that have been here for 3 years or 5 years that are having the existential crisis. It's actually the people that have been here for 20, 30, or 40 years. It's actually people in that range who are in, their mid 40s, early 50s. They've been here for 20 or 30 years, and they're going, whoa, I'm tired. This has been a long time. There are parts of this country that I don't like. There are parts that I do like. I have children here. I'm staying here. Can we just press reset? And I think that's a lot of what is actually happening is, okay, and a lot of what happens too is, we as foreigners in a foreign country, we don't have someone to talk to all the time in our own native language where we can really express what we're feeling. And we don't have someone who's from a same cultural background that shares the same experiences, right? So I'm from the West Coast. I mean, it even goes this deep. Like, I'm from the West Coast. If I talk to someone who's from California, we have very similar shared experiences, shared background, a lot of things like that. And we can, talk about the things that we miss, the things that we like here that we don't like about the West Coast. And, I think that adds a huge part to the financial planning conversation is we just understand each other, right? We know where we're trying to go. We know where we've been. We're similar. And I think the really cool part about that is it transcends age. So I can be 30, 40 years younger than some of my clients. They can be from the West Coast, and we can have a conversation and we get on really, really well because we have that shared experience that, if someone's coming from another country, like, for example, if someone's from Scotland, okay, yeah, we have a shared language, we have a lot in common. We don't have the same shared experiences. So we can work together, and sometimes personally we get on very well. But I have colleagues that are from Scotland. If you want to, I'm happy to introduce you to someone who's Scottish, if that means that you guys will have that connection, because it's very meaningful. It builds trust. It builds understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something I actually learned when I moved here is I was like, where are the people I can actually speak that unspoken language to? And, it's something that I think I had to learn to miss, honestly. But that's a conversation for another day. The one other thing I wanted to chat about was a lot of my peers and my groups of people that I adore here are actually leaving corporate jobs that brought them here and starting their own companies.
Yeah.
And that is actually unexpectedly it's a jolt financially, but also emotionally. And so I think it's another paradigm shift, but financially, have you seen this?
Yeah, I've seen it a lot. And I've seen it a lot amongst people, again, in that age range that we were just talking about, from 25 to probably 45. And so it's a natural evolution, I think, of being an expat or an immigrant. And I've seen it enough that I feel comfortable saying that, is that it's a natural evolution, because you are so used to being independent, having to think for yourself, feeling alone a lot of the time. Even if you do have a partner that's with you, you're used to innovating because you've got to find ways of structuring your life to still feel comfortable and happy, but outside of your comfort zone. So once you've been able to push past that and you're comfortable again, you realize you're kind of good at it, right? And so you keep trying to push past. And so I've seen with a lot of people that we work with that starting your own company is just a natural thing, right? You're so independent and you're so much stronger after you've been through this process. And for some of us, we've been through it 3 or 4 times in 3 or 4 different countries. And you just develop this self-belief that enables you to go out and take more risks. And I love seeing that. And it is a very natural part of the process. Financially, it means different things to different people. And, it can mean, okay, I just had a baby. I've had these conversations before. I just had a baby. I'm starting my own company. And it's like, okay, there's a lot going on there. What can we help you with? Sometimes it's just, what does being self-employed mean for my tax situation rather than being employed? And that can be a really good moment where we can implement some tax planning and say, hey, this is an opportunity to maybe lower your tax burden. So you need to go speak with the accountant we work with, and we'll work with you on this strategy. So I think it can be really varied. Some people have saved up for this moment their whole working career, and they're just ready to press the button and say, go and take off. Other people, it may mean that they struggle financially for a little while, but it could also mean their tax burden might be lower or it could be higher. But we work with people through that circumstance relatively often.
I get the feeling that you can bring your pie in the sky life plans, and you'll be the calming force that will guide through those pie in the sky plans.
Yeah, and I think it is, a lot of that is just being able to lay a baseline for expectations, right? That you can build on and just say, okay, it might not work like that. It might work like this, but it's not going to be a bad thing because of all these other factors that you haven't yet considered. So a lot of times what happens, especially when people are moving, they just go, oh my gosh, I could never pay that amount in taxes. And then we go, really? Let's take a deeper dive. And then at the end of the day, they're actually saving more money than they would have wherever they're from, because they didn't take into account things like cost of living. They didn't take into account things like maybe they're not going to drive in the new place that they live, which that's like a huge shock. That's probably like one of the number one shocks. I tell people I don't drive. They're like, how do you live? Well, it's unnecessary for the life that I live. So it's those are interesting.
How much do you estimate a car costs to own and have that be? Where do you put that on the balance sheet?
So this is really interesting. Different parts of car ownership and different, so like insurance, actually the cost of the car, obviously things like gas are completely different in every country. So that again comes back to like the structuring. So in Italy, you can buy a car for very, very cheap. But sometimes like the annual road taxes, the insurance can be higher than you'd expect to pay. And then in some countries, buying the car is far more expensive, and then the insurance is a lot cheaper. So there are different barriers to entry at different levels, right? And then I think in Italy, you can start driving a Vespa at like 14 without a license.
Oh, yeah.
So there's always that alternative, right? And that doesn't exist.
It's cultural, right?
Yeah.
It goes back. I think if there was a headline here, it would be, it's cultural.
Yeah. Exactly. But, it can be 500 euros a month in a European context to just operate and have the car there. But then when you compare that to the US, where you're, probably buying a more expensive car, you're probably getting it on finance, you're driving far greater distances in almost every circumstance. You're spending a lot more time in your car, so it's a lot more important to you. You know, the comparison to the US is you usually come off better even if you have a car. I think we drive like once a week, once every 2 weeks
Yeah.
sometimes. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of there. It's not an important part of life.
Yeah. It's a totally different relationship with that particular experience.
Yeah.
I moved here for the Bachfiets experience, and I just absolutely love being able to move my body, have the wind in the kids' hair, even though it's really cold wind sometimes. But it's a life choice for sure. Okay, well, we have just one more question for you. Is there anything that you would tell people who are thinking of making this change to live abroad or live internationally?
Yeah. Just give it a try. I think, pluck up the courage and absolutely do it. It is worthwhile. You're going to find parts of yourself that you never knew existed in this process. And you learn things about yourself that are really fascinating. And I would encourage everyone to do it. It definitely opens up your perspective. I think it's something that everyone should give a try at least once in their life, if they can.
Totally agree. Okay, that I could not think of a better way of ending this. Thank you so much for your time. We'll put how people can contact you if they would like to. And thanks for being part of our, how to make your finances match your Instagram photos series. It's been fantastic speaking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed our show. For the latest insights on living internationally, join us at houseofperegrine.com to find out how you can connect with our community. Let's craft our life story with intention together.